Welcome to Beneath the Surface, the Dark Side of Crime. In today's episode, we're diving into one of the most jaw-dropping and mysterious phenomena, runaway brides. Picture this: a woman standing at the altar, dressed in her wedding gown, ready to say, "I do." But instead of walking down the aisle to her future husband, she bolts, leaving everyone in shock. But what causes a bride to leave it all behind on her big day? Was it cold feet, a deeper secret, or a hidden drama that no one saw coming? In this video, we'll unravel the truth behind the runaway bride cases that have left families torn apart and hearts broken. Stay tuned, and don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel. Chapter 1. The Calm Before the Storm. Avery Prescott had always been the picture of the perfect small-town girl. She grew up in Havenwood Valley, a town where everyone knew everyone else's business. The locals knew that her family, the Prescotts, had been pillars of the community for decades. Avery was the youngest of 3 children and the apple of her mother's eye. As the eldest daughter, Claire Prescott had always dreamed of Avery's wedding day. She planned every detail, from the flower arrangements to the bridal shower to the perfect venue at the Rosewood Chapel, a breathtaking location that seemed almost too good to be true. Avery had always wanted the perfect wedding. She'd imagined her big day would be a fairy tale, filled with love, happiness, and the promise of forever. But as the date drew closer, the excitement that had once filled her heart started to wane, replaced by feelings of uncertainty and dread. On the surface, everything was falling into place: flawless dresses, a beautiful venue, and Ethan Matthews, her fiancé, waiting at the altar. Ethan was perfect by all accounts: kind, wealthy, successful, and, more importantly, the man her family adored. But Avery's heart wasn't in it. As she stood in front of the full-length mirror that morning, she couldn't help but notice how her reflection looked beautiful, yet foreign. The sleek white gown hugged her curves in all the right places, but she felt disconnected from it. The veil, the flowers, the endless preparation, it all felt so staged, a performance she wasn't ready to star in. Her thoughts were interrupted when her mother knocked on the door, eager to help her into her dress. Claire beamed as she entered the room. "You look stunning, sweetheart. The entire town will be talking about how beautiful you look today." Avery smiled weakly, adjusting the fabric of her dress. She tried to ignore the twinge of panic that flared up in her chest. "Thanks, Mom. It's all perfect." "You're doing great. This day will be everything you've ever dreamed of." Claire's words were filled with pride, but Avery only felt more anxious. Chapter 2. Whispers of doubt. Avery's best friend, Chloe Harris, had been with her every step of the way. Since childhood, the two had shared everything: dreams, secrets, even heartbreaks. So, when Avery pulled Chloe aside in the bridal suite, there was no hiding the discomfort on her face. "Avery, you've been quieter than usual. What's going on?" Chloe asked, watching her friend adjust her veil again. Avery hesitated, running her fingers over the lace. Her throat tightened, and for a moment she felt like she was about to crack under the pressure. "Chloe, I don't know if I can do this. I don't think I'm ready." Chloe's brow furrowed. "Ready for what?" "To marry Ethan," Avery whispered, her voice quivering. "I don't know if I love him the way I should. I mean, I care about him, but it's not the kind of love that makes me feel alive. I'm not sure I'm making the right decision." Chloe's eyes softened with concern, and she stepped closer. "Avery, you can't do this if you're not sure. It's your life. You don't owe anyone a wedding." "I don't know what to do," Avery said, voice cracking. "Everyone is expecting so much from me. My family, Ethan, the town. If I back out now, it'll ruin everything." "Avery, you can't live for others," Chloe insisted. "You have to make this decision for yourself. If you don't feel ready, maybe you're not. And that's okay." Avery looked at Chloe, the weight of her words sinking in. Chloe was right, but the fear of disappointing her family kept her bound to this path. Could she really walk away from it all? Chapter 3. The secret that could ruin everything. Just days before the wedding, Avery's past came rushing back into her life when Lucas Donovan returned to town. Lucas had been her childhood friend and her first love. They'd shared an innocent connection years ago, a fleeting romance that had never come to fruition. Lucas was wild, free-spirited, and unlike anyone Avery had ever met. He didn't fit into the neat, controlled life that Avery was about to step into with Ethan. When Lucas arrived in Havenwood Valley, it felt as though time had never passed. They met up at a local bar just as they had years ago. The conversation quickly shifted from casual updates to something much deeper. Lucas hadn't changed. He was still the person who could make Avery laugh and feel understood. "Avery, I've always been there for you," Lucas said, his voice low and sincere. "And I don't want you to marry Ethan because it's what everyone expects. You're not happy. I can see it, and I know you're not being true to yourself." Avery froze, her mind racing. She had always cared for Lucas, even after everything had ended between them. Her feelings for him had never completely faded. But how could she admit that? She had a future with Ethan, and yet Lucas made her feel alive in a way she hadn't experienced in years. "I'm marrying Ethan because it's what I should do," Avery said, almost in a daze. "But I don't know if it's what I want." Lucas reached out and touched her arm. "Avery, don't go through with this if your heart isn't in it. You owe it to yourself to follow what you truly feel." Avery's heart hammered in her chest. Was it Lucas she was meant to be with? Or had their brief romance just been a fleeting fantasy that had never really died? She felt torn, lost in the pull of the past and the weight of the future. Chapter 4. The Big Day Arrives. The morning of the wedding felt like a blur of activity. The sun was shining and the town was in full celebration mode. Avery's family and friends buzzed with excitement. The town hall was decorated, the flowers were perfect, and the bridal party was ready. Yet Avery felt like she was living in a dream, or rather, a nightmare. The perfection surrounding her only highlighted her unease. She stood in front of the mirror, staring at herself. Her reflection looked nothing like how she felt. The dress, the veil, the flawless makeup. It all felt like a mask. She wasn't ready for this. She wasn't ready to walk down the aisle and pledge herself to Ethan. Her thoughts were interrupted as her mother knocked on the door. "Avery, sweetheart, it's time," Claire said eagerly. Her mother's eyes sparkled with joy, but Avery could only force a smile. She didn't feel joy. She felt trapped. Ethan was waiting at the altar. The guests were taking their seats, and Avery had no choice but to go through with it. She couldn't disappoint them. She couldn't disappoint herself. Chapter 5. The Escape. The moment came. The doors to the church opened, and Avery was to walk down the aisle to meet Ethan. As she took a step, her heart pounded in her chest. She looked ahead at Ethan, his handsome face radiating excitement, his eyes locked on her with pure love. The reality of the moment hit her all at once. She was about to marry a man she wasn't sure she loved. The weight of the decision bore down on her, and before she even realized it, she was turning around and running. She bolted out of the church, leaving the guests in stunned silence. The sound of her mother's cries echoed behind her as she sprinted through the streets of Havenwood Valley. She didn't know where she was going, only that she had to escape. The town, her family, Ethan, they all represented a life she wasn't ready to live. The further she ran, the more she felt free. The town, her family, the expectations, it all faded away, and for the first time in months, she could breathe. Chapter 6. The Investigation. The town was thrown into chaos. Rumors swirled. Some thought she had been kidnapped, others assumed she had experienced a breakdown. The police were called, and the investigation began. Ethan, devastated and confused, couldn't understand why Avery had run. The sudden disappearance left everyone in shock. Days turned into weeks, and still there was no sign of Avery. The town was torn between worry and anger. Ethan turned to the police, desperate for answers. He began to uncover a troubling truth. Avery had been in touch with Lucas in the days leading up to the wedding. Could it be that Lucas had influenced her decision to run? Had their past connection played a role in her actions? The investigation provided no solid answers. Everyone was left with more questions than solutions. Chapter 7. The Family Fallout. The town of Havenwood Valley was divided. Half of the people sympathized with Avery, understanding the stress of expectations, while the other half was furious. The whispered rumors and speculation were relentless. Avery had been the perfect daughter, the town's golden girl, and now she was the runaway bride. In the weeks that followed Avery's disappearance, her family was left to pick up the pieces of their broken image. Claire Prescott, her mother, couldn't escape the stares and whispers. At the grocery store, people asked her, "How's Avery? Has she been found yet?" Claire smiled politely, her eyes brimming with tears she refused to shed in public. Her world had crumbled, and she couldn't understand why her daughter had betrayed her so openly. Claire had always been a perfectionist, a woman who prided herself on making things flawless. Avery's wedding had been supposed to be the pinnacle of her success as a mother. Claire had spent months choosing the right flowers, the right colors, the perfect venue. Every detail had been planned with precision, down to the last napkin fold. How could Avery just walk away? Richard Prescott, Avery's father, was equally disturbed. But where Claire was emotional, Richard was rational. He tried to keep things under control, but his concern for Avery's well-being grew with each passing day. He understood that the pressure had been immense for her, but he couldn't understand why she hadn't come to them before running away. She was their daughter. Didn't she trust them enough to share her feelings? In the weeks after the incident, Claire and Richard's marriage began to show the strain. Claire withdrew more and more, consumed by the humiliation, while Richard sought out distractions to avoid facing the tension. Avery had always been their emotional anchor, the daughter who excelled and kept the family's reputation intact. Without her, their world seemed empty and uncertain. Sophie, Avery's younger sister, tried to keep the family together. She reached out to their mother in the evenings, trying to convince Claire to speak to Avery. "Mom, we can't just pretend everything is okay. We need to find her." But Claire refused. "She's ruined everything, Sophie. Everything. The wedding, our lives. It's all a lie now. How do you think the town sees us?" The rift between them widened. Claire couldn't see past her own sense of betrayal. Sophie, however, couldn't help but feel for her sister. She knew Avery wasn't just some spoiled runaway. Something deeper was at play. In private, Sophie sought Avery out, trying to understand the silence that had enveloped her sister. She wrote letters, trying to reach Avery wherever she might be. But all the while, Sophie felt a growing disconnect from her mother. Claire's anger towards Avery was all-consuming, and Sophie was caught between the conflicting loyalties of wanting to repair her family and wanting to protect Avery's feelings. It wasn't until one late afternoon, a few weeks after the wedding debacle, that Sophie finally managed to track Avery down. She found her sitting in the local park, her eyes red from days of sleepless nights. The woman in front of Sophie wasn't the bright-eyed bride who had once planned her dream wedding. Instead, she was a shadow of her former self. "I've made a mess of everything, Soph," Avery whispered as Sophie sat beside her. Her voice cracked as the floodgates opened. "I didn't know what else to do. I was suffocating." Sophie wrapped her arms around her older sister, holding her tightly. "You didn't ruin everything, Avery. You just needed to find yourself." But Avery knew the truth. Her escape had torn their family apart, and now, even though she was free, she felt more lost than ever. Chapter 8. The Hidden Connection. As Avery took refuge in solitude, the town's focus shifted to Lucas Donovan. His return to Havenwood Valley had sparked a new wave of curiosity, and the townspeople began speculating that he had played some role in Avery's disappearance. The whispers grew louder, and soon, the once charming Lucas was painted as the villain in the eyes of those who didn't know the full story. Lucas had left Havenwood Valley right after Avery had run. He had taken off without a word, unsure of how to face the mess they had left behind. He had tried to contact her, but she wouldn't return his calls. Every message he sent felt like an intrusion. He knew that Avery had been struggling, but he never imagined it would lead to such a dramatic escape. He had simply wanted to give her the space to figure out what she wanted. When Lucas finally returned, it wasn't by choice. He was summoned by Ethan Matthews, who had been trying to understand the complicated dynamics between Avery and Lucas. Ethan needed closure, and Lucas was the only one who might hold the answers. "Tell me what happened," Ethan demanded as they met in the same bar where he and Avery had once shared intimate conversations. Lucas took a deep breath. "I didn't know she'd run away. I thought she was just conflicted, you know. She told me she was getting cold feet, but I never thought it would go this far." Ethan looked at him intently. "Did you love her?" Lucas hesitated. The truth was complicated. "Yes, I've always cared about her, but not in the way you think. What I care about is her happiness, and I knew that what she was doing wasn't right. She wasn't being true to herself." Ethan's expression tightened. "Then why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you tell her to stay?" "I did," Lucas responded softly. "But Avery. She was so caught up in everything, the wedding, the expectations, her family. She couldn't see a way out. I tried to make her realize she wasn't ready to make that commitment. But I wasn't the one she needed to listen to. She needed to listen to herself." Ethan sat back, stunned by the revelation. The truth had always been buried beneath the surface, and now it was out in the open. Avery hadn't just left him. She had been running from herself all along. Chapter 9. The Aftermath. Avery's return to Havenwood Valley was anything but smooth. Though she had been running from the truth, the reality of her escape was inescapable. The town was still reeling from the chaos her flight had caused. Ethan was nowhere to be found, and the people she once called friends couldn't look her in the eye. At home, things had changed. Claire's anger had cooled, but the damage was done. Avery's escape had been the catalyst for a deep rift in their family. Even though her mother didn't show it, Claire's disapproval was written all over her face. She couldn't understand why Avery had taken such drastic steps. And worse, she couldn't forgive Avery for making their perfect life look like a farce. Avery found herself spending more and more time alone, sitting in the old attic of their house, looking out at the world she had once tried to control. She knew her mother would never accept her decision to run, but it was more than that. Avery had been running from the pressures of the life everyone had planned for her. Now it was time to face those pressures head-on and rebuild her life. But could she ever heal the rift she had created? Ethan, on the other hand, had taken refuge in his family's business. He focused all his energy on work, trying to block out the pain of losing Avery. The media had begun to hound him, asking about the runaway bride, and the town's whispers only grew louder. But the truth was more complicated than he could have imagined. He wasn't just heartbroken by the wedding's cancellation. He was mourning the loss of the future he had envisioned with Avery. And as he learned more about the woman she had become, he realized he might have never known her at all. Chapter 10. The Shocking Truth. In a climactic final conversation, Avery sat down with her family to reveal the truth behind her actions. She had avoided them for weeks, too ashamed to speak up. But now, she knew she couldn't run from the truth any longer. It wasn't just about her escape. It was about the person she had become while trying to fit into a life that wasn't hers. "I wasn't ready to marry Ethan," Avery said, her voice steady but her eyes filled with emotion. "But that wasn't just it. I wasn't ready to marry anyone because I didn't even know who I was anymore." Her mother, Claire, looked at her, eyes wide in disbelief. "What are you saying, Avery?" "I wasn't running from Ethan," Avery continued, her voice shaking. "I was running from myself, from everything I had been taught I should be. The perfect daughter, the perfect fiancé, the perfect woman, but I never asked myself what I truly wanted. And when I looked into Ethan's eyes that day, I realized I wasn't the woman he thought I was. Claire's face softened. She didn't fully understand, but she could see the pain in Avery's eyes. The truth had finally come out. Avery wasn't running from love. She was running toward herself. In the final moments of the story, Avery's family began to understand that her actions weren't born of selfishness but of fear, a fear of losing herself in the face of everyone else's expectations. As the story closed, Avery realized that she had learned a valuable lesson. The truth may be painful, but it was necessary for healing. Avery's journey teaches us that sometimes the biggest betrayal isn't a person, but the expectations we place on ourselves. She didn't just run from her wedding, she ran from the pressure to live a life that wasn't her own. And in doing so, she learned that the hardest truth to face is often the one we hide from ourselves. Never marry because of obligation. You must marry because you want to, because your heart is in it. Always prioritize self-understanding and emotional honesty. Sometimes the hardest decisions are the ones that bring the most freedom.